My wife forgot I'm a forensic accountant when she secretly spent $118,000 of our savings on a sports car for her 25-year-old boyfriend. Welcome to Revenge Galore. If you crave real gripping stories where justice hits hard and betrayal never goes unpunished, this channel is your new favorite place. Please subscribe. My name is Jacob Webb, and for 16 years I thought I knew everything about my wife Rachel. I'm 47 years old, a senior forensic accountant with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in Chicago. My job involves tracking down the most sophisticated financial criminals in the country, people who think they're clever enough to hide money trails from federal investigators. I've sent hedge fund managers to prison for Ponzi schemes, uncovered corporate embezzlement worth hundreds of millions, and traced cryptocurrency laundering operations across international borders. But I never imagined I'd need to use those skills on my own wife. Rachel Webb, formerly Rachel Morrison, was everything I thought I wanted in a partner when we met 17 years ago. She was 26, working as a marketing coordinator for a downtown advertising agency, with an infectious laugh and the kind of confidence that made everyone in the room gravitate toward her. I was 30, recently promoted to senior investigator, and completely captivated by her energy. Our courtship was a whirlwind of weekend trips to Wisconsin, dinners at trendy restaurants, and long conversations about building a life together. Rachel appreciated my stability and success, while I was drawn to her creativity and social ease. Within a year we were engaged. Within 2 years, we were married in a beautiful ceremony at the Chicago Botanic Garden. For the first decade of our marriage, everything seemed perfect. Rachel left her marketing job after a few years, claiming she wanted to focus on personal projects, and eventually starting a family. I supported her decision completely. My salary as a federal investigator was more than enough to maintain our comfortable lifestyle in Lincoln Park. We bought a beautiful brownstone, took annual vacations to Europe, and I made sure Rachel never wanted for anything. When she expressed interest in interior design, I funded a certification program at the Art Institute. When she decided she wanted to try freelance event planning, I covered her startup costs. When she said she needed a reliable car for her business, I bought her a BMW X5. Rachel never had children, despite our early discussions about starting a family. She claimed she wasn't ready, then that her business was taking off, then that we should wait until we were more financially stable. I didn't push. My job required long hours and frequent travel, and I trusted Rachel's judgment about timing. Looking back, I realized that Rachel's lack of interest in having children should have been a warning sign. Not because there's anything wrong with being childless, but because it represented the first of many changes in the life plans we discussed together. By our 10th anniversary, Rachel had settled into a comfortable routine. She maintained a small event planning business that generated modest income, spent her days shopping, lunching with friends, and working out at an expensive fitness studio. She seemed happy, and I was content knowing that my hard work provided her with the freedom to pursue her interests. But around our 12th anniversary, things began to change in ways that were subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. Rachel started talking about reinventing herself and exploring new experiences. She joined a yoga studio in River North, enrolled in art classes at the Chicago Cultural Center, and began attending evening networking events for creative professionals. She bought new clothes, expensive, trendy pieces that were quite different from her previous style. "I'm discovering who I really am," she told me one evening over dinner. "I've been so focused on being a wife that I forgot to be myself." I encouraged her self-discovery, thinking it was healthy for her to develop new interests and social connections. When she started staying out later for her various activities, I assumed it was part of her personal growth. When she became more secretive about her phone and social media, I told myself she was entitled to privacy. The first financial red flag appeared 15 months ago, but I almost missed it. I was reviewing our joint bank statements, a monthly ritual I'd maintained since we were married, when I noticed a series of cash withdrawals that seemed unusually large. Over the course of 6 weeks, Rachel had withdrawn $3,200 in cash from various ATMs around the city. When I asked her about it, Rachel had a ready explanation. "I've been paying for some of my art classes and yoga sessions in cash," she said. "Some of these smaller studios prefer cash payments, and it's easier than writing checks all the time." The explanation was plausible, and I didn't think much of it. Rachel had always been somewhat disorganized with money, and cash payments for services weren't unusual. But over the next few months, the cash withdrawals continued and escalated. By my count, Rachel was withdrawing between $800 and $1,200 per week from our accounts. When I mentioned that the amount seemed high for classes and studio fees, she expanded her explanation. "I've been doing more shopping at farmers markets and local boutiques," she said. "A lot of these places are cash only, and I like supporting small businesses." Again, the explanation was reasonable. Rachel had always been conscious about supporting local businesses, and Chicago had plenty of cash-only vendors and markets. But my professional instincts were starting to activate. In my work, large cash withdrawals were often the first sign of financial deception. People used cash specifically because it was harder to trace than credit card purchases or electronic transfers. 6 months ago, I decided to pay closer attention to our household finances. Not because I suspected anything specific, but because the cash withdrawals had created a pattern that bothered me professionally. What I discovered was the beginning of a financial mystery that would eventually expose the most devastating betrayal of my life. The first anomaly I identified was in our credit card statements. Rachel's spending had increased dramatically over the past year, not just in total amount, but in the types of purchases she was making. In addition to her usual expenses for clothes, beauty treatments, and dining, Rachel was now making regular purchases at high-end electronic stores, luxury men's clothing retailers, and expensive restaurants I'd never been to. When I cross-referenced these purchases with my own calendar and Rachel's explanations of her activities, the discrepancies were obvious. For example, on a Tuesday evening when Rachel claimed she was at a yoga class, our credit card showed a $340 charge at Gibson's Steakhouse. When I asked her about it, she said she'd gone to dinner with her friend Sarah after class, but the charge was for 2 people at one of Chicago's most expensive restaurants, hardly a casual post-yoga meal. Similarly, I found charges at Nordstrom Men's Store, Apple Store purchases for devices we didn't own, and recurring payments to a high-end car detailing service, despite the fact that Rachel's BMW was only 2 years old and still under warranty. Each individual purchase had a plausible explanation when I asked about it. The men's clothing was a gift for my brother's birthday. The electronics were for my business. The restaurant charges were networking dinners or celebrating friends' successes. But taken together, the pattern was unmistakable to someone trained in financial investigation. Rachel was funding someone else's lifestyle. The second major red flag was Rachel's behavior around financial discussions. For 15 years, we'd maintained complete transparency about our finances. I handled the day-to-day management because of my professional expertise, but Rachel always knew our account balances, investment performance, and major expenses. Starting about 8 months ago, Rachel began showing less interest in our financial planning conversations. When I tried to discuss our budget or upcoming major purchases, she'd wave off the conversation with comments like, "I trust you to handle all that," or, "You're so much better with numbers than I am." More concerning, Rachel began pushing back when I asked about specific expenses. Instead of her usual detailed explanations, she'd become defensive or dismissive. "Why are you questioning every little thing I buy?" she asked when I mentioned the increase in her credit card usage. "We can afford it, and I've never been irresponsible with money." The shift from transparency to defensiveness was exactly the kind of behavioral change I'd learned to recognize in fraud investigations. People who are hiding financial activity typically become sensitive about questions that wouldn't have bothered them before. But the discovery that changed everything happened 3 months ago, during what should have been a routine financial review. I was updating our investment portfolio and retirement planning spreadsheets when I noticed that our main savings account balance was significantly lower than I expected. According to my calculations, we should have had approximately $180,000 in the account. The actual balance was $127,000. A discrepancy of $53,000 wasn't something that could be explained by miscalculations or forgotten expenses. That was a substantial amount of money that had been withdrawn or transferred without my knowledge. I immediately began a detailed analysis of the account activity, using the same forensic techniques I employed in federal investigations. What I found was a systematic pattern of large transfers and withdrawals that had been occurring for nearly 8 months. Most of the transfers were electronic, moving money from our savings account to our checking account in amounts ranging from $5,000 to $12,000. These transfers were then followed by large cash withdrawals, cashier's checks, or wire transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. The total amount of money that had been moved out of our savings account without my knowledge was $87,000. I was staring at evidence of systematic financial fraud being committed by my own wife, using our joint accounts to fund activities I knew nothing about. That night, I made a decision that would change both of our lives forever. Instead of confronting Rachel immediately, I was going to conduct a complete forensic investigation of our finances and her activities. If Rachel was committing fraud, and the evidence strongly suggested she was, then I needed to understand the full scope of her deception before taking any action. In my professional experience, financial crimes were rarely simple or isolated. If someone was willing to steal $87,000, there was usually much more beneath the surface. I also needed to protect myself legally and financially. If Rachel was using our joint accounts for illegal activities, I could potentially be held liable for her actions unless I could prove I had no knowledge of or involvement in her scheme. Over the next week, I began treating my own household like a crime scene. I started by securing copies of all our financial records going back 2 years. Bank statements, credit card bills, investment account activity, tax returns, insurance policies, everything that might contain evidence of Rachel's financial activities. I also set up monitoring on all our joint accounts so I could track her spending in real time. While I couldn't prevent her from accessing our money without revealing my investigation, I could at least document exactly what she was doing with it. The picture that emerged over the following month was devastating and increasingly clear. Rachel wasn't just withdrawing large amounts of cash or making mysterious purchases. She was systematically transferring money to specific accounts and making regular payments to people and businesses I'd never heard of. The largest recipient of Rachel's transfers was an account belonging to someone named Tyler Morrison, no relation, despite sharing Rachel's maiden name. Over the past 8 months, Rachel had transferred a total of $94,000 to Tyler Morrison's accounts through various methods including wire transfers, cashier's checks, and digital payment apps. When I ran Tyler Morrison's information through law enforcement databases, I discovered he was a 25-year-old personal trainer and aspiring model with no significant income or assets. His social media profile showed a lifestyle that was clearly being funded by someone else: expensive restaurants, designer clothes, luxury travel, and most significantly, a brand new Porsche 911 Carrera. The Porsche had been purchased 6 weeks ago from a dealership in Schaumburg for $118,000. The purchase was financed through a loan that required a down payment of $35,000. Rachel had provided the down payment. But the car purchase was just the beginning of what I discovered about Tyler Morrison and his relationship with my wife. Using my federal access to financial databases, I was able to trace nearly every dollar that Rachel had transferred to Tyler over the past 8 months. The money had been used for the Porsche down payment, $35,000. A monthly car payments, $1,800 per month for 6 months. Rent for Tyler's apartment in River North, $3,200 per month. Credit card payments, approximately $2,000 per month. Cash payments, $800 to $1,200 per week. A gym membership and personal training certification, $4,800. Vacation to Cabo San Lucas, $8,200. A designer clothing and accessories, $12,000. High-end electronics and gadgets, $6,300. Rachel wasn't just having an affair. She was financially supporting her lover's entire lifestyle using money she'd stolen from our joint accounts. The timeline of the financial transfers corresponded perfectly with Rachel's behavioral changes. The first payment to Tyler Morrison occurred exactly 15 months ago, right around the time Rachel had started talking about reinventing herself and exploring new experiences. All of Rachel's new activities, the yoga studio in River North, the art classes, the networking events, were taking place in the same neighborhood where Tyler lived and worked. She wasn't discovering herself through these activities, she was creating cover stories for an affair. But discovering the affair was only half of the investigation. I also needed to understand how Rachel had been able to steal nearly $100,000 from our accounts without my knowledge. The answer revealed a level of deception and planning that was genuinely sophisticated. Rachel had been exploiting my trust and my travel schedule to move money in ways that I wouldn't immediately notice. She knew that I reviewed our finances monthly rather than daily, giving her weeks to execute transfers and create cover stories for large expenses. She'd also been taking advantage of my professional focus on federal crimes rather than personal finances. Because I trusted her completely, I wasn't applying the same scrutiny to our household accounts that I would to a criminal investigation. Most cleverly, Rachel had been timing her largest financial moves to coincide with my business travel. When I was out of town for investigations, she would execute major transfers, knowing that I wouldn't be monitoring our accounts in real time. The systematic nature of Rachel's deception indicated that this wasn't an impulsive affair that had gotten out of hand financially. This was a calculated scheme to use our marriage as a source of funding for her relationship with Tyler Morrison. But Rachel had made one crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed that I would never apply my professional investigative skills to our personal finances. She thought she could continue stealing money indefinitely because I trusted her too much to look closely at the evidence. She was wrong. By the time I'd completed my financial investigation, I had documented evidence of systematic fraud, theft, and financial deception spanning more than a year. I had tracked nearly every dollar Rachel had stolen, identified the recipient of the stolen funds, and established a clear timeline of criminal activity. But I wasn't ready to confront Rachel yet. I wanted to understand the full scope of her relationship with Tyler Morrison before taking any action. That's when I made a decision that would provide the final pieces of evidence I needed. I hired a private investigator. Monica Sterling was a former FBI agent who'd specialized in surveillance and financial crimes before starting her own private investigation firm. I'd worked with her on several federal cases where we needed to track suspects outside of official law enforcement channels. I explained the situation to Monica without revealing too many personal details. I told her I suspected my wife was having an affair and using our joint funds to support her lover financially, and I needed documented evidence of their relationship for divorce proceedings. Monica's investigation confirmed everything I'd suspected and revealed details that were even more damaging than I'd imagined. Rachel and Tyler Morrison had been in a relationship for approximately 14 months. They met at the fitness studio where Tyler worked as a personal trainer, and Rachel had initially hired him for legitimate training sessions. But their relationship had quickly become sexual and then financial. Within 2 months of meeting Tyler, Rachel was paying for his apartment, covering his living expenses, and helping him purchase luxury items he couldn't afford on his trainer's salary. Monica's surveillance revealed that Rachel and Tyler were together at least 4 days per week, often spending entire afternoons at his apartment or going on expensive shopping trips and dinners. They behaved like a couple in every sense, holding hands, kissing in public, and clearly comfortable with intimate physical contact. Most damaging of all, Monica captured video and photographic evidence of Rachel handing Tyler envelopes of cash, helping him shop for expensive clothes, and celebrating with champagne when he received the keys to his new Porsche. In one particularly devastating photo, Rachel and Tyler were kissing in the front seat of the Porsche she'd helped him buy, with her wedding ring clearly visible on her hand. But Monica's investigation also revealed something else. Tyler Morrison wasn't the faithful lover that Rachel probably thought he was. Monica discovered that Tyler was also involved with at least 2 other women, both of whom appeared to be providing him with financial support. One was a divorced real estate agent in her 40s who was paying for Tyler's gym membership and training certifications. The other was a widow in her 50s who had bought Tyler expensive jewelry and was helping him build a modeling portfolio. Tyler Morrison was essentially operating a small-scale financial fraud scheme, targeting older women with money and convincing them to fund his lifestyle in exchange for romantic attention. Rachel wasn't Tyler's only victim, but she was by far his most generous benefactor. The other women were providing hundreds or low thousands of dollars per month. Rachel was providing nearly $12,000 per month in direct transfers, plus covering major expenses like his car down payment. This discovery added another dimension to Rachel's betrayal. Not only was she stealing our money to fund an affair, but she was being manipulated by someone who was simultaneously scamming multiple women. Armed with comprehensive evidence of both the financial fraud and the affair, I was finally ready to take action. But I wasn't going to simply confront Rachel and demand explanations. I was going to destroy both her and Tyler Morrison's ability to continue their scheme, recover as much of our stolen money as possible, and ensure they both faced serious legal consequences for their crimes. The first step was consulting with my attorney, David Rothstein, who specialized in both family law and financial crimes. David had represented several clients in high-net-worth divorces involving financial misconduct, and he understood exactly what we were dealing with. "Jacob," David said after reviewing my evidence, "what your wife has done constitutes multiple felonies. Wire fraud, theft, money laundering, and potentially racketeering if we can prove she knew about Tyler's other victims." "What about asset recovery?" I asked. "With this level of documentation, we can freeze all her accounts immediately and force the return of any recoverable assets. The car, for example, can be repossessed since it was purchased with stolen funds." "And criminal charges?" "Absolutely. The FBI will be very interested in this case, especially given your professional background. This isn't just marital infidelity, it's organized financial crime." David outlined a strategy that would maximize both the legal consequences for Rachel and Tyler, and my ability to recover our stolen assets. First, we would file for divorce immediately, with a motion for emergency asset protection based on evidence of financial misconduct. This would freeze Rachel's access to our accounts and prevent her from stealing any additional money. Second, we would file criminal complaints with both the FBI and the Chicago Police Department, providing all my evidence of financial fraud and requesting full criminal investigations. Third, we would file civil lawsuits against both Rachel and Tyler for recovery of stolen funds, targeting any assets they'd purchased with our money. Fourth, we would coordinate the timing of all these legal actions to occur simultaneously, preventing Rachel and Tyler from destroying evidence or hiding assets once they realized they'd been caught. The key, David explained, is to move fast and coordinate everything perfectly. Once Rachel realizes you know about the affair and the money, she'll try to cover her tracks. We need to have all the legal protections in place before she has a chance to react. I agreed to David's strategy, and we began preparing all the necessary legal documents. Within a week, everything was ready for execution. But I decided to add one final element to my plan. I wanted Rachel to understand exactly how thoroughly she'd been caught before the legal consequences began falling on her. I was going to give her one last chance to confess everything voluntarily. Not because I hoped she would, but because I wanted her reaction on record when she inevitably lied to my face. 3 weeks ago, on a Sunday evening when Rachel returned from what she claimed was a weekend yoga retreat, I asked her to sit down for a serious conversation about our finances. Rachel, I said, I've been reviewing our accounts and I'm concerned about some discrepancies I've found. I need you to help me understand where some of our money has gone. Rachel's expression immediately became guarded, but she maintained her composure. What kind of discrepancies? We're missing about $90,000 from our savings account. Large transfers and withdrawals that I can't account for. Do you know anything about that? Rachel was quiet for a long moment, clearly calculating her response. When she spoke, her voice was steady but defensive. Jacob, you know I don't handle the detailed financial stuff. If money is missing, maybe you should check with the bank about errors or unauthorized transactions. I've already checked with the bank, I replied. These weren't errors or unauthorized transactions. These were legitimate transfers and withdrawals made with our account access. Someone who knows our account information has been moving large amounts of money for months. Well, it wasn't me, Rachel said quickly. I mean, I've made my normal purchases and withdrawals, but nothing like $90,000. That's crazy. I pulled out a folder containing bank statements with highlighted transactions. These are transfers totaling $87,000 over the past 8 months. According to the bank, they were all authorized using your online banking access. Rachel looked at the statements and I watched her face carefully. She was trying to appear confused and concerned, but I could see the panic in her eyes. I don't understand this, she said. I've never made transfers like this. Maybe someone hacked our accounts. Rachel, I said quietly, I know about Tyler Morrison. The effect was immediate and devastating. Rachel's face went completely white, and her hands began trembling. For a moment she couldn't speak at all. I don't know what you're talking about, she finally whispered. I know about the apartment you're paying for in River North. I know about the Porsche you helped him buy. I know about the $94,000 you've transferred to his accounts over the past year. Rachel started crying, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic and desperation. Jacob, please, it's not what you think. I think you've been stealing our money to fund an affair with a 25-year-old personal trainer who's also scamming at least 2 other women, I said. I think you've committed multiple felonies and destroyed our marriage for someone who's using you. It's not like that, Rachel said through her tears. Tyler loves me. We're planning a future together. I was going to tell you. A future together? Rachel, Tyler is taking money from 3 different women simultaneously. You're not his girlfriend, you're his most generous client. I showed her some of Monica's surveillance photos, including images of Tyler with his other benefactors. Rachel stared at the photos in shock, clearly seeing evidence of Tyler's other relationships for the first time. This can't be true, she said weakly. It's all true and it's all documented. Every transfer, every payment, every lie you've told me over the past year. Rachel's composure completely collapsed. She began sobbing uncontrollably, alternating between apologies and accusations. I never meant for this to happen, she cried. I just felt so trapped in our marriage, so ignored by you. Tyler made me feel young and desired again. So you decided to steal nearly $100,000 to make yourself feel better? I was going to pay it back. Tyler's modeling career is starting to take off, and he promised he'd help me repay everything once he started making real money. The delusion was breathtaking. Rachel had convinced herself that Tyler Morrison, a 25-year-old con artist who was simultaneously scamming multiple women, was going to become a successful model and help her repay the money she'd stolen from her husband. "Rachel," I said, "Tyler Morrison has no modeling career. He has no legitimate income. He's a criminal who targets older women with money, and you've been his biggest victim." But Rachel wasn't ready to accept the truth about Tyler. Even confronted with photographic evidence of his other relationships, she continued to insist that their connection was real and that Tyler genuinely cared about her. "You don't understand our relationship," she said. "Tyler sees me for who I really am. He appreciates me in ways you never have." "Tyler appreciates your bank account," I replied. "The moment your money stops flowing, he'll disappear." Our conversation continued for another hour, but it became clear that Rachel was incapable of accepting responsibility for what she'd done. In her mind, she was the victim of our marriage, of Tyler's deception, and now of my investigation into her crimes. She kept returning to the same themes. She felt unappreciated in our marriage. Tyler made her feel special. She planned to repay the money eventually, and I was being cruel by investigating her private life. At no point did Rachel acknowledge that she'd committed serious crimes or express genuine remorse for betraying my trust and stealing our money. By the end of the conversation, I knew that Rachel was never going to voluntarily confess or cooperate in recovering our stolen assets. She was going to force me to pursue every legal remedy available. Fine. I was prepared for that. The next morning, David Rothstein and I executed our coordinated legal strategy. At 9 a.m., David filed for divorce in Cook County Family Court, along with an emergency motion for asset protection based on evidence of financial misconduct. The motion included a request for immediate freezing of all joint accounts and a temporary restraining order preventing Rachel from accessing any marital assets. At 10 a.m., I walked into the FBI Chicago field office and filed a formal criminal complaint against Rachel and Tyler Morrison for wire fraud, theft, and conspiracy. I provided the FBI with copies of all my financial evidence, Monica Sterling's surveillance reports, and documentation of the systematic nature of their scheme. At 11 a.m., David filed civil lawsuits against both Rachel and Tyler, seeking recovery of all stolen funds plus damages and attorney fees. The lawsuits included requests for immediate asset seizure, particularly targeting the Porsche that had been purchased with our money. At 12 p.m., the FBI executed search warrants on Tyler Morrison's apartment and Rachel's personal accounts, seizing computers, phones, financial records, and other evidence of their criminal conspiracy. Rachel was at Tyler's apartment when the FBI arrived. According to the agent's report, she was completely shocked by the raid and kept insisting that there had been some mistake. Tyler Morrison, meanwhile, immediately asked for a lawyer and refused to make any statements. His reaction suggested that he was more experienced with law enforcement than Rachel realized. By 2 p.m., all of Rachel's access to our joint accounts had been frozen by court order. She couldn't withdraw money, make transfers, or use our credit cards. Her financial support for Tyler Morrison was cut off immediately. By 4 p.m., a repossession team had recovered Tyler's Porsche from the parking garage of his apartment building. Since the car had been purchased with stolen funds, the court authorized its immediate seizure pending resolution of the criminal charges. Rachel called me that evening, hysterical and furious. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed. "You've destroyed my life. They took Tyler's car, they froze all my accounts, the FBI interrogated me for hours." "I didn't do anything to you, Rachel," I replied calmly. "You destroyed your own life when you decided to steal our money and commit fraud." "It wasn't fraud. It was our money, and I had every right to use it." "You had a right to use reasonable amounts for legitimate household expenses. You didn't have a right to transfer $94,000 to your lover without my knowledge or consent." Rachel continued screaming accusations and demands, but I wasn't interested in arguing with her. Everything I needed to say had been said in court filings and criminal complaints. "Rachel," I interrupted, "you should focus on finding a good criminal defense attorney. You're going to need one." I hung up the phone and blocked her number. From that point forward, all communication would go through our respective lawyers. The legal proceedings moved quickly once they began. The FBI's investigation confirmed everything I'd documented and revealed additional evidence of criminal activity. Tyler Morrison's computers contained detailed records of his financial relationships with multiple women, including spreadsheets tracking how much money he was receiving from each victim. Rachel wasn't his first victim, but she was his most profitable. Tyler's records showed that he'd been systematically targeting married women with substantial household income, using dating apps and social media to identify potential victims. Tyler's method was sophisticated and deliberate. He would meet women at upscale gyms, yoga studios, or social events, presenting himself as an aspiring model and personal trainer who was temporarily struggling financially. He would then cultivate romantic relationships with these women, gradually increasing their financial support by creating various emergencies and opportunities that required funding. Rachel fit his target profile perfectly. Married to a high-earning professional, lonely and seeking excitement, and with access to substantial joint accounts that her husband trusted her to manage responsibly. The FBI's investigation also revealed that Tyler had been planning to escalate his scheme by convincing Rachel to invest in a fake modeling agency that he claimed to be starting. Rachel had already agreed to provide $50,000 for this investment, and had been in the process of arranging the transfer when my investigation exposed their activities. In other words, Rachel wasn't just Tyler's victim. She was actively participating in what would have become an even larger financial fraud. Tyler Morrison was arrested 2 weeks after the FBI raid and charged with wire fraud, theft, money laundering, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise. His bail was set at $500,000, which he couldn't afford without access to his victim's money. Rachel was arrested the following week and charged with the same offenses. Her bail was set at $250,000, which she also couldn't afford since all our joint assets were frozen pending resolution of the criminal and civil cases. Both Rachel and Tyler hired criminal defense attorneys, but their legal strategy appeared to be focused on minimizing their sentences rather than contesting their guilt. The evidence against them was overwhelming and well documented. The asset recovery process was equally successful. Within a month of filing our civil lawsuits, David had recovered approximately $67,000 in cash and assets that could be directly traced to our stolen money. This included the Porsche, repossessed and sold $89,000. Tyler's apartment security deposit, $6,400. Cash found in Tyler's apartment during the FBI raid, $8,200. Expensive electronics and jewelry, $12,400. Irrecoverable transfers from Tyler's bank accounts, $18,600. The remaining $27,000 appeared to have been spent on travel, dining, and other consumable expenses that couldn't be recovered. But we were able to recover nearly 75% of the stolen money, which was a better outcome than I'd initially expected. More importantly, the civil lawsuit established that both Rachel and Tyler were liable for the full amount of our losses, plus damages and attorney fees. Even if they couldn't pay immediately, they would be legally obligated to repay everything they'd stolen. The divorce proceedings were equally straightforward. With documented evidence of Rachel's financial crimes and adultery, the court awarded me the vast majority of our marital assets. Rachel's criminal defense attorney advised her to accept a plea agreement rather than risk a trial, where her exposure could have been much more severe. She ultimately pled guilty to wire fraud and theft charges and was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. Tyler Morrison also accepted a plea agreement, but his sentence was more severe due to his leadership role in the scheme and his pattern of targeting multiple victims. He received 4 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. Both Rachel and Tyler were also ordered to pay full restitution to all their victims, including the $94,000 they'd stolen from me. The most satisfying aspect of their downfall wasn't the legal consequences, though those were substantial. It was watching their relationship implode once the money stopped flowing. According to Monica Sterling, who continued monitoring the situation during the legal proceedings, Tyler Morrison immediately cut off all contact with Rachel once he was arrested. He never visited her in jail, never provided emotional support during her legal troubles, and made it clear to other inmates and his attorney that he considered Rachel a liability rather than a romantic partner. Rachel, meanwhile, continued to believe that Tyler genuinely cared about her until she learned about his other victims through the FBI investigation. Even then, she seemed more angry about being deceived than remorseful about her crimes. During her sentencing hearing, Rachel gave a statement claiming that she'd been manipulated by Tyler and that she was sorry for the pain she'd caused our marriage. But her apology felt scripted and self-serving rather than genuine. Tyler Morrison showed no remorse at all during his sentencing. He claimed that his relationships with his victims were consensual and that he'd never forced anyone to give him money. In his mind, he was simply an entrepreneur who'd found a profitable niche market. The judge wasn't impressed by either of their attitudes and imposed sentences at the high end of the recommended guidelines. Today, nearly 6 months after discovering Rachel's betrayal, I'm rebuilding my life with a clear understanding of what authentic relationships require. Rachel is serving her federal sentence at a minimum security facility in Illinois. She's written me several letters attempting to rebuild some kind of relationship, but I haven't responded to any of them. Our marriage is legally over, and I have no interest in maintaining contact with someone who demonstrated such fundamental dishonesty and lack of character. The broader lesson from this experience is that financial transparency is essential in any committed relationship. When one partner begins hiding financial activity from the other, it's almost always a sign of deeper problems that need to be addressed immediately. Today, Rachel is in federal prison learning that crimes have consequences, and Tyler Morrison is discovering that targeting the wrong victim can destroy your entire scheme. The $118,000 sports car that triggered my investigation has been sold, with the proceeds applied to restitution payments. Rachel's 25-year-old boyfriend is serving 4 years in federal prison and will face financial obligations for the rest of his life. And I'm rebuilding my life with a clear understanding of what authentic relationships require: honesty, transparency, mutual respect, and shared accountability for major decisions, especially financial ones. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones most capable of devastating betrayal. But sometimes your professional skills are exactly what you need to protect yourself and ensure that justice is served. Rachel forgot that I'm a forensic accountant when she decided to steal our money for her affair. That was her mistake, and ultimately her downfall. Have you ever discovered financial irregularities in your relationship that made you question your partner's honesty? How would you handle learning that someone you trusted was systematically stealing from joint accounts? Do you think criminal prosecution is justified when financial infidelity involves large amounts of money? Let me know in the comments what you think about Jacob's decision to treat his wife's affair as a criminal investigation. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Revenge Galore for more stories where justice hits hard and betrayal never goes unpunished.